Hi guys, Vegathron here. In today's video, we'll be kicking off a new series where I rank every game I've played in a given genre, and tell you what I liked and didn't like about them. The genre we'll be looking at for this episode will be roguelites. It's hard to hammer down the exact requirements for what makes a game a roguelite, but it can be boiled down into a few common traits. The player is expected to die repeatedly. Each time you die, you'll get sent back to the start to try again, losing all progression of your current run. You will, however, generally speaking, earn some kind of currency which you can spend to make your future runs a little bit easier. This is often in the form of unlocking new abilities, weapons, or other beneficial things which will help during a run. This is referred to as meta progression. To combat the repetitive nature of this genre, there's usually a huge variety of weapons, monsters, and loot that can be found within each run, and usually many playstyles and builds to experiment with, meaning every run will be a little different. Not every roguelite has all these features exactly, but this is the general idea that most games of the genre follow for the most part. There are a total of 15 games in my library that could be considered roguelites, and starting us off first is Risk of Rain 1. Now, this might be my lowest ranked game on the list, but it still has a lot of great things going for it. Risk of Rain pits you not only against its monsters, but the clock as well. As time progresses, enemies will become more powerful and more plentiful, forcing you to strike a balance between searching for more loot versus progressing before the enemies become too powerful. I liked how many items and power-ups there were to find, and the randomised looting was both fun and made each run a little different from the last. Risk of Rain offers online and split-screen co-op, which is on the rare side for this genre. However, I did find during co-op it was easy to lose track of your character in the heat of battle. Combat was simple yet fun, with each unlockable character playing very differently, but there was also a few things that stopped me from enjoying this game as much as I could have. For starters, the difficulty curve was a little too steep for my liking, especially so in co-op where you need to share the loot, and the difficulty ramping up over time, while an interesting mechanic, doesn't feel fun if you're the kind of player who likes to search for every item and secret in games. The meta progression system also left a bit to be desired, as the only real thing to unlock was new characters and artifacts, which did significantly alter gameplay but felt more like a change of flavour than progress and wasn't all that satisfying. Next in the countdown, we have Rogue Heroes: Ruins of Tazos. This game is a unique addition to the genre, combining RPG elements such as classes and quests with the roguelite formula. Unlike most roguelites, Rogue Heroes offers a lot more than just combat in the form of fishing, farming crops, and exploring an overland map. The meat of the game involves delving into 4 dungeons placed in each corner of the map in an effort to defeat the boss and progress to the next dungeon. Progression felt really good as the game has plenty of upgrade options and awards a generous amount of currency for each run. These upgrades are made available by constructing new buildings for your town, such as blacksmiths and tailor shops, and even lets you choose where to place them, which was a nice touch. Being able to freely change classes was a feature I enjoyed later in the game. However, early on they all felt very similar until I unlocked more items. Up to 4-player co-op is supported, and in my opinion, this is the way the game should be played. Dungeons and puzzles will adapt to accommodate the number of players in the game, which was a cool feature I liked a lot. Now for some things I didn't enjoy so much. For starters, the story is pretty generic and uninspired, and so was the world it was based in. And despite there being 4 different dungeons and a huge overworld, I felt the game began to feel stale midway through. The problem was there aren't many things that change between each dungeon, and repeating dungeons, despite the rooms being random, doesn't change gameplay enough to keep them feeling fresh. This lack of variation extended to other areas of the game as well. All classes still used a sword as their melee attack, and there really is no random power-ups each run. Instead, the game relies on the character progression system, which, while satisfying early on, is only really raw stat boosts for the most part, and later in the game I found I was making so much money I was able to boost my health and damage so high that I could essentially face tank dungeon bosses, which felt a bit cheesy. As a result, the game lacks those highs of getting an amazing run that roguelites are generally known for, and instead gives you more of an RPG experience, which is fine, but doesn't quite give you that dopamine kick other roguelites give you. At number 13, we have Neon Abyss. Neon Abyss, true to its name, caught my eye with its bright neon colour palette and art style. Platforming and combat was solid, but I found my enjoyment was relying on upgrading away from the starting gun. Speaking of guns, there is a crazy amount of unique weapons and items in the game. Every gun has a unique gimmick which range from badass to straight up ridiculous, and I always enjoyed not knowing what I could find next. Same can be said for power-ups. There is a mind-boggling amount, and they did a great job coming up with original ideas. These power-ups range from game-breaking to near useless or even detrimental, so there's a great variety. Neon Abyss is at its finest when you're stringing together weird and wonderful builds and enjoying all the fun items the game has to offer. But sadly, it feels like the game is very stingy with its loot. Sometimes I'd go for stages upon stages stuck with the starter gun. Sure, it does the job, but man, it's boring to use. Same can be said for the meta progression. The effort to reward ratio felt a little off, which resulted in me ignoring it for the most part. There was also a pet system where you could hatch eggs to gain a helpful companion. They can even level up and evolve, which sounds great on paper, but once again this system felt held back a bit as the pets can easily die permanently, and what I found to be even stranger, the eggs can fail to hatch at all and simply disappear. I didn't understand why they added this to the game at all, and all it seemed to do was add frustration to the game for no reason. Despite me disagreeing with a few design choices, at its best the game is super fun and has a lot of potential, and I did find myself enjoying it for the most part. At number 12 we have FTL. FTL is a unique entry into the roguelite genre. Instead of playing a single character and getting new items and power-ups, you instead take control of a starship and recruit crew members who can level up as well as getting ship upgrades and weapons. The game is a bit light on meta progression, the only form of which comes from unlocking new ships and layouts, which can take a long time. On the bright side, each ship plays a lot differently and changes what strategy you'll employ. The combat itself is surprisingly deep, allowing you to target specific subsystems of enemy ships, while also managing your own ship's power and crew. This can sometimes be a lot to think about at once, but thankfully time can be paused at any moment with the press of a button to give you some breathing room. I enjoyed being able to choose between focusing on ship combat, boarding,
It's dead. Dead, Jim. The man is dead.
disabling or using drones to fight. And being able to mix and match these tactics also kept runs feeling fresh once I had access to more than the starter ship. I did feel the runs were a little too RNG dependent at times, as a streak of bad luck could often doom your run through no fault of your own, which was a bit frustrating, and this is made to feel worse with the surprisingly sharp learning curve. While I did notice the graphics felt a bit basic, I didn't really find it hindered my enjoyment. FTL plays out more like a choose-your-own-adventure in space than a roguelite, but I actually found that refreshing, and it was a sweet moment when I finally got a victory against the Rebel flagship. Number 11, Streets of Rogue. Streets of Rogue is the perfect game to play with a bunch of friends who aren't looking for anything too hardcore. This game doesn't take itself as seriously as the other games in this list, and is easy to jump right into and start having a blast. I love the huge range of characters to unlock, all of which significantly changed how I played and added a unique flavour to each run. Each character had a unique side mission to complete that fitted their aesthetic. For example, I enjoyed playing as a zombie whose mission it was to infect a percentage of the population each level, or the comedian, who had to tell a certain number of jokes to the NPCs. I think having so many unique characters was a big factor on why this game has so much replayability, and also caters to so many playstyles. The meta progression in this game involves unlocking characters, which is done by completing various tasks during a run. I found myself enjoying this approach and often found myself doing runs just to unlock a character I wanted, instead of actually trying to complete the main mission. It also meant I could unlock most characters I wanted in the order I wanted them. The second progression system was unlocking new items and perks to encounter in your runs and using the game's currency, chicken nuggets. This is a pretty standard system, and while there are certainly some great perks in the game, I found a lot of them felt a bit lackluster, which in turn made the perks way less exciting to unlock compared to unlocking new characters. I also found that the average runs felt a bit too long, especially in co-op where you can constantly be revived by teammates. This was good if you enjoy the character you picked, but I often found myself an hour into a run, discovering I didn't like my character and secretly hoping the team wiped. Overall though, this game is my go-to if I'm after some casual co-op fun with friends, and it's given me a good amount of laughs. Entering our top 10, we have Enter the Gungeon. Similar to Neon Abyss, one of the highlights of Enter the Gungeon is the huge and unique gun variety. With around 200 in the game, one of my favourite parts of each run was coming across chests and discovering what cool weapon the game would offer me next. The game is jam-packed with references to other games and movies in the form of weapons and items, and this was an aspect I really enjoyed. The combat itself was satisfying with the ability to dodge roll, flip tables over for cover, and use various items. However, the difficulty curve for the first few hours of playing is brutally hard, and as a result, I nearly gave up on this game early on, as I felt I was getting nowhere. The meta progression is a little slower than I'd like it to be. After 7 hours of gameplay, I've only unlocked a handful of new items, and no new characters. But I understand this can vary depending on how good you are at these types of games. And to the game's credit, even with the very few unlocks, 4 base characters and huge selection of guns was more than enough variety to keep it from getting stale. At the time of recording, I've only played around 7 hours of this game, but it's definitely one I'd like to play a lot more of. At number 9, we have Moonlighter. Moonlighter brings something unique to the genre, with the game being split between raiding dungeons by night and running a shop by day. The shop gameplay is actually really well done. I enjoyed tweaking prices and using customer reactions to work out the value of items, and slowly upgrading my shop was an enjoyable gameplay element and made the dungeon delving feel all the more rewarding. The meta progression is both broad and well paced. I could upgrade my weapons and armor using dungeon loot, which made hunting down items all the more fun. Each dungeon had multiple floors and set mini-bosses, as well as a big boss at the end of the final floor. I found these to be a fun challenge for the most part. However, there were a few bosses who seemed a bit unfair in design, which was a source of frustration. Combat was pretty good, with a nice variety of weapons and armor. Each weapon played differently and had multiple upgrade paths. I discovered the spear early on and took a liking to its charge attack, which hit quite hard and made you invulnerable during the charge animation. And each other weapon also had a few tricks to master, which was cool. Another mechanic was how cursed loot worked. Cursed items can affect other items in your inventory in various ways, such as destroying them or even duplicating them, depending on what the curse mark was. This adds another layer of depth as you need to strategize inventory placement. Usually inventory related gameplay is boring in games, but in this case I think it adds to the overall game, and I've never seen anything quite like it before in a game. About halfway through the game, I must admit I was finding the dungeon gameplay a bit repetitive and stale. Each dungeon had a different theme and new enemies, and while I would be excited for the first few runs, it just didn't feel different enough to keep it feeling fresh. Overall, the art style and vibe of this game was cozy, and I did get a second wind after a break and finished it completely. This doesn't really have the replayability of other roguelites, however it did have a lot of really unique elements and I thoroughly enjoyed it overall. At number 8, we have Star Renegades. When I first got this game, I honestly didn't even realise it was a roguelite until I was about 30 minutes into my first run. If you ever wanted to know what would happen if you spliced a JRPG with a roguelite, look no further. Turn-based combat in a roguelite isn't something you see too often these days, but I really enjoyed this change of pace. The combat was satisfying and, as you would expect from a turn-based game, very tactile. There was a lot to consider when making my moves, such as which threats to stagger, what my damage type was, as well as what my enemy was weak to. As an added bonus, you could also fast forward combat to make fights faster, which was a great quality of life feature. There was also a nemesis system, similar to Shadow of Mordor. Each of the generals all had random traits and weaknesses. In the event they defeated you, they would rise in rank and become more powerful. This definitely spiced up some of the boss fights, and I enjoyed researching a boss's trait and trying to plan around them. I did find some really nasty trait combinations, and coming across this an hour into a run and losing because of it did feel a bit rough. The big appeal for me going into this game was the top tier pixel art. It's some of the best I've seen, and combined with equally good animations and character designs, every fight was a treat to watch. This goes for the game's soundtrack as well. The sci-fi style of music complements the visuals really well and creates an amazing atmosphere. There were a total of 14 characters overall to unlock, each with their own niche and unique skills, and it was a lot of fun testing out different party compositions. Each run in Star Renegades essentially felt like a condensed down JRPG game, from leveling up characters, to unlocking new skills, to obtaining higher level gear, and even strengthening bonds between party members. This was a very satisfying aspect of the game, but it did come with a bit of a cost. On paper, there is a lot of variation and randomness to each run, with finding different items and encountering different enemies, and this was all great. However, in practice, I found each run felt pretty similar unless I changed my party composition drastically. Perhaps this changes when getting deeper into the game, but it is definitely something that stuck out to me. At number 7, we have Risk of Rain 2. Risk of Rain 2 is a huge upgrade from the original game. While the main concepts remain unchanged, this iteration takes place in a 3D world and the pixel graphics are replaced with cel shading while still retaining the original game style. Straight away I noticed exploring each map was far more enjoyable and less linear with having more than 2 directions to choose from, and being third person, I was no longer losing track of my character. For me, the loot and items were the best part of the first game, and this aspect was even better this time around, with more chest types and loads of powerful items that are satisfying and impactful. The co-op feature has stuck around and works a lot better due to the 3D nature of the map, as well as third person. Probably the biggest upgrade compared to the first game was definitely the combat. Jumping around, spamming abilities, triggering all the power-ups you found, and watching the enemies melt is truly addictive. And while in my opinion, the difficulty curve is still very steep on the normal mode, the game definitely makes you feel rewarded for mastering its mechanics. I appreciated the easier difficulty that let me enjoy the game while I was building my skills. The meta progression is a bit better with the ability to unlock new characters and also alternative character skills. And the characters themselves all play very differently, which adds some extra flavour to each run. You still have to race against the clock, and the rush playstyle that comes with it wouldn't be my first choice if I could choose, but there was something satisfying trying to balance looting as many chests as I could with getting through the level fast. Some runs do feel awful if you can't locate the teleporter, or if you get unlucky with the loot, but that's balanced out with the runs where everything lines up perfectly and you feel like a god. And trying to get these god runs is a big part of what kept me coming back for more. Number 6, Children of Morta. It's not all that often you talk about storytelling when it comes to roguelite games, but Children of Morta does it extremely well. I thoroughly enjoyed every scene and event I came across, each was voiced masterfully by the narrator. At times I almost thought I was playing Bastion or a Supergiant game.
The old seer's bones felt the weight of their age as she climbed.
This game undoubtedly has a lot of great things going for it, although it does have a bit of a slow start, as many characters and upgrades are unavailable early on, and I found I was repeating the cave level a few more times than I would have liked. The spider boss at the end of this level was near impossible to beat until I'd grinded out a few upgrades, and even now that I've finished the game, this one still gave me the biggest challenge. I could see this being a turn-off for a lot of players, which is a shame, as after getting past this hurdle, the game opens up and flows really nicely. Unlocking new family members to play felt exciting, and each one played significantly differently, with their own skill tree and abilities. Once I found a character that meshed well with my playstyle, I really got into the groove, and my progress accelerated as a result. There were multiple progression systems, such as upgrading the family's stats and giving them buffs. Upgrading each member's skill trees individually, as well as the aforementioned character unlocks. The start of the game aside, I felt like I was always getting a satisfying new upgrade. The overall combat was great. Running through and killing large groups of enemies gave me a mild Path of Exile vibe, and getting a large killing spree rewarded bonus gold, which was a touch I liked. The various blessings and active effects that could be found were all well designed and all fun to use when you got them.
Like frozen lightning, the relic waited to be put to use by the hero.
But I found they were a bit on the rare side early on, and it was hard to really build around them. There's also couch co-op available, which is a welcome addition. I was kind of sleeping on this feature for most of the game, expecting it to be a bit clunky, but to my surprise, it was actually incredibly well done. In hindsight, I almost wish I played the entire game in co-op. Being able to mix and match abilities and playstyles of the Jurgensen family added a whole new layer of strategy, while at the same time made runs more forgiving with the revive mechanic. Overall, this was a super fun game with a little bit of everything to offer, and I enjoyed my time in it. Before we continue, only around 1% of people who watch these videos are subscribed. If you've made it this far and like what you've seen, why not help me out by hitting that sub button and leaving a like? Now without further ado, back to the video. Entering our top 5, we have Curse of the Dead Gods. Took me a while to pick this game up, but boy I'm glad I did. The Aztec theme meshes extremely well with the roguelite mechanics and is brought together with a beautiful looking art style. I enjoyed the large variety of weapons, which included pistols, whips, swords, bows, shields, and many more, and the variety and combinations of these weapons is one of the game's biggest strengths. Diving into the Dark Temple with my torch in hand to light the way gave me big Indiana Jones vibes. Although sadly I couldn't use a whip and pistol at the same time, as they were both offhand weapons, but I made do. The combat was surprisingly deep, with the ability to parry, dodge roll, use a main hand, an offhand weapon, as well as a heavy weapon and a torch. Having all these tools at your disposal meant there was always a lot of options to choose from during combat, which felt really good. The greed kill system, which awarded bonus gold for chaining consecutive kills, made you want to keep a good pace, and overall made for a very fun and fluid combat system. Weapons also have random traits for even more variation on your runs, which was a nice touch. This is further built on with the relics, which gave various bonuses and buffs. The meta progression is solid and lets you unlock more weapons, blessings, and starting weapon options for each run. However, I did feel like a large majority of the blessings felt a little underwhelming, and even from the start, there was not a lot I was excited about unlocking. This is probably the game's biggest weakness in my opinion. As for unlocking new weapons, I also found anything cool sounding I unlocked was so hard to find in an actual run I often forgot I unlocked it by the time it popped up. Despite this, the difficulty curve of the game felt just right, and while I did get a bit stuck on the tier 2 runs, eventually something clicked and I aced them all back to back. Another aspect I enjoyed about the game was the curse system. When entering a new area, or when doing a blood sacrifice, your corruption bar fills. Once it's completely full, you will receive a random curse. This can happen up to 5 times, and generally the higher level the bar, the worse the curse. This mechanic creates a great risk versus reward scenario, where you're always trying to keep on top of your corruption, while at the same time resisting the temptation of blood sacrifices for better loot. And for me, this fitted the theme perfectly, and was a really unique aspect of the game that I enjoyed. Surprisingly, the game lacks any real story, and while this is definitely a missed opportunity, the gameplay itself is so fun that I didn't really find myself missing it. Number 4, Gunfire Reborn. This was the first FPS roguelite I played, and I must say, I'm impressed. This game ticks all the desired boxes for a roguelite, such as huge weapon variety, random gun rolls, a massive impactful perk list, great skill trees, great meta progression, and multiple characters to unlock. Combining all this together and you end up with a game that has one of the most fun and diverse ways to build your character on the list. Similar to Risk of Rain 2, when you get the right synergies and loot on your build, you'll feel like a god. Watching huge damage numbers and health bars chunk away is extremely satisfying and will keep you coming back for more. The combat itself was very enjoyable, although it did take me a while to get used to having no melee button, and sprint being replaced with a dash. If I had to criticise, it is maybe a little too close to Borderlands combat. The way the damage types work, the shield, armor and health bars, many guns as well as some character abilities do feel like it was ripped straight from Borderlands. However, they do add on to this with things like elemental combos, and the game is generally unique enough as a whole to overlook this. There are 5 biomes, each with their own unique enemies and bosses, which keeps the game feeling fresh. If you've played as much as I have, you will grow a bit tired of some of the earlier zones, but you'll definitely get your money's worth before that happens. Gunfire can be played both solo or with up to 4 players, and honestly this might be the best co-op roguelite on the market. It's basically all the best parts of Borderlands co-op condensed into a 30 to 60 minute run, and who doesn't want that? And tackling the bosses and harder levels with 4 buddies was some of the best fun I've ever had in a co-op game. Entering our top 3, we have Void Bastards. Although an FPS like Gunfire, Void Bastards takes a completely different approach with slower, more tactical gameplay. Unlike the other games in this list, I didn't often find myself kicking in the doors guns blazing every level. Instead, the gameplay focused more on smart planning and resource management such as food, ammo and fuel, and hunting down the items you need to build new weapons and gear. This style definitely won't appeal to everyone, but for me it was a breath of fresh air. Once I mastered just staying alive, runs would go for an extremely long time, but unlike a lot of roguelites, I was able to save at any time and continue on from where I was mid-run, which was a really nice quality of life feature. The difficulty curve is fairly gentle for a roguelite, gave me ample time to get my bearings and experience a few levels before kicking my teeth in, which was actually kinda nice.
Secbond is on the way and will end your life shortly. Please remain calm. Thank you for your understanding.
Earlier runs were occasionally a little frustrating when running out of ammo.
Whoops-a-daisy. It looks like you've run out of bullets.
But this wasn't an issue once I figured out to conserve ammo and get a few upgrades. You were somewhat racing against the clock as your oxygen depletes, but being able to refill it by hacking the oxygen stations meant I wasn't feeling stressed trying to race the clock, but it was enough to stop me dawdling. The meta progression is excellent and comes in the form of crafting and upgrading different weapons and devices. Hunting down these components for upgrades make up the bulk of what you'll be focusing on.
Smart thinking. The Steve will now display a green arrow guiding you to the required parts.
Certain ships on the map will hold certain types of components, and hunting these down is incredibly satisfying. There's plenty of things to upgrade and craft, however, this mechanic is implemented in a way that didn't feel too grindy. This was at least in part due to how addictive and fun the gameplay of sneaking through ships is. Looting every container and hacking various systems, I often found myself saying, just one more loot run, for hours on end, being unable to put the game down, which I haven't had with a game in quite some time. If I had to make a complaint, I did find myself noticing the lack of any major bosses, which I thought was a missed opportunity, but it's somewhat made up for with great level design. Even before you start a level, you're already thinking about what guns and equipment would be best suited to the type of ship you're boarding. And there's no shortage of other random variations that you can run into, such as power outages, radioactive leaks, rifts, and many more. All this keeps gameplay fresh and interesting, and you'll constantly be adjusting your game plan while on the fly. All this while hearing the witty and hilarious banter of the intercom and your correctional officer.
Feel free to use these items constructed by a former client. A little scrubbing with bleach should remove the bloodstains.
This, along with the beautiful cel-shaded graphic style, keeps what could have been a dark and scary game light-hearted and fun, which I think was the right choice. And we can't talk about Void Bastards without touching on the various character traits. Each time you die, you come back as a new character with new traits.
Recruiting replacement client.
I absolutely love the variety and uniqueness of these traits, and they often had a pretty big impact on how I played. These range from things like Paranoia, that caused you to randomly hear voices, Smoker, which caused your character to randomly cough and alert enemies, the things that actually helped you, such as Runner, which made you faster, or Shallow Breather, which lowered oxygen consumption. I didn't even get close to discovering all these traits, but it all played a huge role in making each run feel fun and unique. Number 2, Hades.
Anyone else?
I know what you're all thinking. How is Hades not number 1? Well, truth be told, I could have happily swapped number 1 and 2 in the list around. Both games are top tier, and honestly, it just boils down to personal preference. But I digress. As a fan of other Supergiant games, such as Bastion and Transistor, Hades was a no-brainer to pick up. Hades uses a very cartoony and colourful aesthetic, which is executed perfectly and makes the game instantly recognisable within the genre. This is backed up with an awesome soundtrack that really gets you hyped during the more intense combat. Speaking of which, the combat was very fun and felt super responsive. Killing enemies was satisfying and the whole game just had a beautiful flow to it. Replayability is extremely high, as I discovered there were loads of factors that could impact your build and keep gameplay feeling fresh and exciting. The most obvious of which are the God Boons. These are essentially perks granted to you by the gods as you progress through the run. These always come with some cool dialogue and a choice of one of 3 buffs that are aligned to the god's theme. This is implemented really well, and to me, one of the coolest ways to put a power up in a game I've seen to date. Since you can choose from a few options, you aren't just at the mercy of RNG. This leads to some interesting choices and gives a feeling of freedom. If I had to nitpick, I do wish there was a few alternative areas or bosses, or even a few more areas altogether, so fingers crossed for a future DLC. I mentioned Hades has insanely good replayability, and a big part of that is because of the great meta progression the game offers. There are layers upon layers of things to progress and unlock, from permanent stat boosts at the Mirror of Night, to unlocking all 6 infernal armaments and their aspects, to collecting and leveling charms. The list goes on, and it all feels satisfying and impactful. There are also just as many variables that you can alter to affect your build. For example, each of the 6 weapons plays incredibly differently to each other. And then on top of that, each aspect further augments a particular element, or in some cases, completely transforms it. When you also add in God Boons, Daedalus Hammers, Chaos buffs, charms, and Karen buffs on top of this, you quickly see just how much freedom this game gives you. Whenever I'm starting to feel bored, all I have to do is swap a charm, swap a weapon, and the game feels different enough that I'm ready to go again.
Alright, one more time.
And finally, to top all of this off, despite being a roguelite, Hades manages to have a really great story and top tier dialogue.
I have considered many possibilities, boy. and I trust Orpheus considered many possibilities before he signed away his rights to see his so-called muse when once he invaded my realm.
The implementation is done flawlessly. Sometimes it feels like a story is forced into a game, which can often break up the combat and feel like a chore. But Hades somehow avoids this by seamlessly working it into the game and drip-feeding your story progression as you do more and more runs. The amazing voice acting brings all of the characters to life and helps Hades deliver some of the best storytelling in a roguelite that I've ever experienced. And at our number 1 spot, we have none other than Deadcells. The game that first got me into roguelites. Sitting at the throne alongside Hades, these two games set the golden standard on what a great roguelite should look like. The second I loaded into the main menu, I was instantly in love with the game's amazing soundtrack. I'm not even sure what you'd call this style of music, but it had this unique vibe to it that was both serious and upbeat at the same time, and gave me a sense of urgency while I was running through levels murdering things. If my ears were in bliss from the soundtrack, then so were my eyes from the visuals. Deadcells has some of the nicest looking pixel art I've seen in the genre. Everything is greatly detailed with a vibrant colour palette, all augmented with various lighting and glow effects that makes this game look like a work of art. The combat is some of the most intense and fast-paced gameplay I've experienced in a roguelite, and it has an incredible flow once you get used to the movement. Whether you prefer to explore every nook and cranny and loot every chest, or power through the levels at light speed, Deadcells has got your back and rewards both playstyles. The combat is harsh yet fair, and especially at higher difficulties, you are punished pretty heavily for making a mistake. However, it is incredibly satisfying to master, and you'll feel like a king when you learn to time your parries and dodge rolls. There's an insane number of weapons and mutations to unlock, so naturally, the meta progression is on point. Even 70 hours in, I still feel excited when I find a new blueprint. Finding blueprints of new weapons or mutation and escaping the level with them allows you to spend cells to add them to the loot pool. I particularly liked that, upon unlocking them for the first time, the weapon physically appears for you to try out during that run. And furthermore, if you decide you don't like the new unlocks, you can prevent them from spawning entirely without any penalty by doing a custom run. This is a huge quality of life feature, and I wish more roguelites adopted this. Each weapon and skill has randomized traits, which can also be re-rolled at a vendor. Getting the right weapons with the right traits can yield extremely potent results, as they can be hugely synergistic. When all the stars align and you finally hit that perfect build, you'll find yourself flying through the run, and it's these addictively fun highs that got me so hooked. This is a little subjective, but for me, Deadcells has the best replayability of any game on this list. I've already spoken about the huge variety of weapon combos and great meta progression, but a common roguelite problem that Deadcells addresses is level repetition. Deadcells has a great solution to this by including multiple routes, which all lead to wildly different biomes. If I found myself getting sick of the first few levels, it was as easy as choosing a different route. As an added bonus, this also meant the game had a great variety of enemies, and I was impressed that every single one behaved in a unique way and had a unique set of moves that I had to learn, no reskins. As with Hades, it was hard to find anything bad about Deadcells, but again, if I had to nitpick, I did find the story was very vague and a bit weak in its delivery. Particularly the lore rooms felt like they were more annoying than anything, but thankfully these can be disabled in the settings. Despite this minor shortcoming, Deadcells still earns its number 1 spot by being almost flawless in every other category, and a must-play for any roguelite fan out there. Now, it goes without saying, there are probably loads of amazing roguelite games I've yet to play that weren't included in this list, so let me know in the comments if I missed one of your favourites. One honourable mention I would like to include is Skull. I've heard great things about this game, and I imagine it would be a contender among the top 5 spots. When I do eventually play this, I'll be sure to let you know where I would place it in the list on a pinned comment. But anyway, that's about all for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.